Richard was walking through the hallway of his mansion when he heard something impossible, a small broken voice that had never sounded in that house before. He stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. He opened the door slowly, and he saw it. His two paralyzed sons, whom the best doctors in Europe had declared unable to speak, were reaching their arms toward a simple woman, and with all the effort of their fragile little bodies, they whispered, "Mom." But she wasn't their mother. She was only a domestic worker. How was it possible? What had this woman done that he, with all his fortune, could not achieve? Like this, if it touched your soul. It is more than a click. It is a silent hug among those who know what it is to lose and to find again. Comment how you think this story will end. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it costs you nothing. But for us it means the world. Thank you for being here. The Salvatierra mansion stood over the hills of California, like a monument to elegant pain. Its old stone walls absorbed the sunset light without giving it back, and the gardens surrounding it, although perfectly kept, seemed to exist only to be looked at, never to be lived in. The marble fountains whispered to no one. The wide corridors echoed with steps that were never in a hurry, and in the heart of that imposing structure, Richard Salvatierra walked like a man who had forgotten how to live his own life. He was 42 years old, but his eyes carried decades more. The grey suit always perfect, the hair combed back with military precision, the straight posture he learned in Swiss boarding schools. Everything in him screamed control, but anyone who got close enough could see the truth. The hands that shook slightly when holding a cup of coffee, the jaw that tightened when he passed in front of a certain photograph, the way he looked away every time someone mentioned the past. Isabella had died 2 years ago. The birth got complicated in ways that no money could foresee, and when the doctors handed him the twins wrapped in blue blankets, they also handed him a sentence: cerebral palsy. No possibility of speaking, no possibility of walking, no possibility of leading a life that looked like what he had imagined. Richard spent fortunes. He hired neurologists from New York, physical therapist from Boston, specialist from Switzerland who charged by the minute. He transformed a complete wing of the mansion into a private clinic, equipped with muscle, stimulation machines, assisted communication devices, gadgets whose names he did not even remember. Nothing worked. Martin and Alvin remained still in their adapted wheelchairs, with special cushions that held their fragile bodies, with looks that seemed to go through the world without touching it. The whole house breathed that emptiness. The employees spoke in whispers, as if they feared waking something up. The nurses came in and out with cold efficiency, did shifts, gave medications, wrote in folders, but no one stayed longer than necessary. No one looked at the children as if they were children. They treated them as cases, as responsibilities, as small bodies that had to be kept alive, but would never really be people. And Richard, in the middle of all that, had become a ghost inside his own fortune, until Lucy arrived. Lucy Morales was 34 years old and had hands that told stories her mouth would never say. She had arrived on a Tuesday morning, sent by an agency of domestic workers from San Antonio. She did not bring impressive references or academic degrees, only experience taking care of elderly people in other people's houses, cleaning rooms that would never be hers, cooking meals she would never taste at the main table. The housekeeper, a severe woman named Adela, received her with the same warmth reserved for new furniture. "You will be in charge of cleaning the East Wing and assisting when the nurses require it," she told her, walking with fast steps down the corridor. "Mr. Salvatierra does not tolerate mistakes. Here everything must be perfect. Invisible but perfect." Lucy nodded, used to those words. Invisible. It was what she had been all her life. Her mother had also been a domestic worker, and Lucy grew up in kitchens of huge houses, playing with the children of her bosses until they turned 7 and stopped seeing her as a friend to see her as service. She learned to look down, not to give an opinion, to exist in the margins. But she also learned something else, to see those whom no one saw. The first day, while she was organizing the white clothes in the closet near the children's room, she heard a cry. It was not loud. It was a broken moan, as if it came from someone who had forgotten how to ask for help. Lucy left the sheets and looked through the half-open door. There were Martin and Alvin in their adapted chairs, alone. One of them had his face contracted in a grimace of discomfort, and the other simply looked at the ceiling with wet eyes. Lucy looked around. There was no one. The nurses must be on their break. She entered slowly, as if approaching something sacred. She knelt in front of Martin, the one who was moaning, and checked carefully. The safety belt was too tight, pressing his small stomach. She loosened it gently, and the boy stopped complaining. Then she turned toward Alvin, who was looking at her with those huge, dark eyes, full of something she could not name, but recognized: loneliness. "Hello, little one," she whispered, reaching out to stroke his cheek. "You are okay. I am here." Alvin blinked, and something in that gesture, so simple, so human, made Lucy feel a knot in her throat. From that day on, every time she passed near the room, she went in. At first only to adjust a blanket, to clean a stain, to open the window and let the air in, but little by little, she started to stay longer. She talked to them while she folded their clothes. She sang them old songs her mother had taught her, and she discovered something strange. They listened to her, not like one listens to background noise. They really listened to her. One afternoon, while she was humming a melody, she saw that Martin moved the fingers of his left hand to the rhythm of the song. It was barely a tremor, something anyone could mistake for an involuntary spasm, but Lucy saw it, and she knew it was not a coincidence. "You like that, right?" she asked with a smile. "Then I will sing it to you again." And she did, again and again, until the sun went down and Adela called her to go down for dinner. 3 weeks later, the impossible happened. Richard was walking through the second-floor hallway, back from an endless call with his lawyer, when he heard something that made his world stop. A small, broken, insecure voice, a word he had never heard in that house. "Mom." He stood frozen, with his hand on the doorknob of his office. His heart was hitting his ribs as if it wanted to escape. He turned slowly, almost with fear, and walked toward the children's room. The door was half open. Inside, Lucy was sitting on the floor between the 2 wheelchairs, with a storybook open on her lap. The twins had their faces turned toward her, their expressions more alive than Richard had ever seen. And then, with a visible effort, with their whole bodies trying to obey a will that seemed bigger than themselves, Martin reached his arm toward Lucy and repeated, "Mom." Alvin did the same, with a shaking but clear voice. "Mom." Richard entered the room as if walking inside a dream. Lucy stood up quickly, scared, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Salvatierra, What did you do?" Richard's voice came out harder than he intended. It was not an accusation. It was disbelief mixed with something darker, uglier, resentment. Lucy looked at him without understanding. "I just was reading them a story. They said, 'Mom.'" Richard pointed to the children, his hands shaking. "They have never said a word. The best specialists in the country told me they never would. And now—" He went silent because he did not know how to finish that sentence. How had a domestic worker without studies achieved what hundreds of thousands of dollars in treatments could not? How did his own children call a stranger Mom instead of looking for him? Lucy breathed deeply, choosing the words carefully. "Sir, I did nothing special. I just spent time with them. I talk to them. I sing to them. I treat them like what they are, children." "Children who cannot respond," Richard replied, and the pain in his voice was so raw that Lucy had to look away. "They can," she said in a low voice. "It is just that no one waited long enough to listen to them." Richard felt the blow of those words like a punch in the stomach. Because it was true, he did not wait. He paid others to wait, to do the things he did not know how to do, and when it did not work, he paid more. But he never stayed. He never sat on the floor with them like Lucy did. He never looked at them as if they were enough just as they were. "I want to see your contract," he said suddenly, his voice more controlled now, "and I want you to report to me daily on any change." Lucy nodded, but before he left, she dared to speak. "Mr. Salvatierra, they do not call me Mom because they mistake me for someone else. They call me that because they need a word to say safety, and I gave it to them." Richard did not answer. He left the room, closed his office door, and poured himself a whiskey he did not touch. He stood looking out the window until night fell, thinking about a truth he did not want to accept. His children were waking up, and he was not there to see it. The following days were strange. Richard began to watch from the shadows, spying on his own house like an intruder. He saw Lucy take the children to the garden in the mornings, sitting them under the shade of the old oak tree. She described the sky, the clouds, the flight of the birds to them, and they in their limited way responded. A blink, a guttural sound, a crooked smile that broke the heart. One afternoon, Richard heard her singing. It was not a song he knew, but the melody felt familiar to him in a way he could not explain. He approached quietly and saw something that left him frozen. Lucy was holding an old notebook with a worn leather cover. He knew that notebook. It was Isabella's. When Lucy finished singing, Richard entered the room with firm steps. "Where did you get that?" Lucy startled, hugging the notebook against her chest. "I found it in the closet among the old blankets. It has songs written by hand. I thought maybe your wife had composed them for them." Richard reached out his hand, demanding the notebook without words. Lucy handed it to him carefully as if it was something alive. He opened it and felt the air leave his lungs. The pages were full of Isabella's delicate handwriting. Lullabies, poems, love notes addressed to 2 children she never got to know awake. "For when you are afraid, for when you feel alone, so that you know your mum loved you before seeing you." Richard closed his eyes, squeezing the notebook so hard his knuckles turned white. He had not opened that closet in 2 years. He had not wanted to, and now he understood why Lucy had achieved the impossible. She was using Isabella's words. She was bringing her back in the only way possible. "How long have you been singing this to them?" he asked with a hoarse voice. "Every night and every morning," Lucy answered. "The handwriting is old. Some phrases I don't understand well, but the children, they recognize them. It's impossible. They never met her." "Maybe memory is not only in the mind, sir," Lucy said gently. "Maybe it is also in the heart, and they have the same heart as she did." Richard sat in the chair by the window, suddenly exhausted. Lucy waited in silence, not knowing if she should stay or go. Finally, he spoke. "Isabella wrote songs when she was pregnant. She said the babies listened to her from inside, that they would be born recognizing her voice. But when they were born, she was no longer here, and I kept all this because I could not stand to read it." "She loved them," Lucy said, "and that love is still here, in every word she wrote." Richard looked up, and for the first time in 2 years, he let the tears fall without trying to stop them. From that night on, something changed in the Salvatierra mansion. The silence was still there, but now it was full of new small sounds, short laughs, attempts at words, the soft dragging of the chair wheels when Lucy moved them so the children could see the garden from another angle. Richard began to be more present, not in the way he had tried before, hiring experts and buying solutions, but for real. He entered the children's room in the mornings and greeted them, looking into their eyes. He sat nearby while Lucy sang to them, and one night, when Alvin stretched his arm looking for something, Richard offered him his finger. The boy grabbed it with surprising strength, and Richard felt that small fist was holding him more than he was holding the boy. Lucy watched those changes with a mix of relief and caution. She knew Richard's pain was deep, a wound that did not heal with a few pretty words, but she also saw the struggle in his eyes, the effort to break the walls he had built around his own heart. One afternoon, while she was preparing the children's snack, Richard entered the kitchen. It was unusual. Mr. Salvatierra never went down to that part of the house. "Lucy, I need to talk to you." She wiped her hands on her apron and nodded. "Of course, sir. I want to understand what exactly you do. The doctors told me that Martin and Alvin's progress was neurologically improbable, that their condition did not allow this type of communication." Lucy thought about it for a moment before answering. "I am not a doctor, Mr. Salvatierra. I cannot explain it to you in scientific terms, but I believe your children were not absent. They were waiting, and when someone finally stayed long enough, they decided to respond." "What do you mean by staying?" "The therapists came for hours, did their exercises, and left. The nurses did shifts. Everyone treated the children as patients, but I stayed because I wanted to, not because I was paid more or because it was my duty. I stayed because I saw something in them that no one else was seeing." "And what did you see?" Lucy smiled sadly. "Life, hope, desire to be loved." Richard stayed silent, processing those words. Then he asked something he had been avoiding. "Do you think I can recover the lost time with them?" "Time is not recovered, sir," Lucy said honestly. "But you can start over from today." A week later, a violent storm hit the region. The sky darkened in the middle of the afternoon, and the wind hit the mansion's windows with fury. Thunder rumbled like cannon shots, and the rain fell so hard it seemed the world was falling apart. Richard was in his office when the lights flickered, once, twice, and then total darkness. The emergency generator took a few seconds to activate, and in that interval of absolute blackness, he heard a cry that froze his blood. He ran toward the children's room, going up the stairs 2 by 2. When he opened the door, he found Martin and Alvin shaking in their chairs, with their faces contracted in terror. Their small hands were holding onto the armrests, and their mouths were opening in silent screams that could not form complete words. Calm down, Richard said, kneeling in front of them, but the children were not looking at him. They were looking for something, for someone. And then, amid the noise of the storm, he heard the broken voices trying to form a name. Lou, Sai. The door opened, and Lucy appeared, breathless, with wet hair and a soaked uniform. She had been in the garden picking up the pots when the storm started, and she ran back. As soon as the power went out, "I'm here," she said, going directly toward the children. She did not hesitate. She did not ask. She simply knelt between the 2 chairs, took Martin and Alvin's hands, and began to sing. It was one of Isabella's songs, a soft melody, almost like a whisper, that talked about refuge and calm. And while Lucy sang, the children began to calm down. They stopped shaking. Their breaths became slower. They closed their eyes, trusting. Richard watched the scene from the door with his heart broken and rebuilt at the same time. He saw how his children clung to Lucy, with a desperation they had never shown toward him, and instead of resentment, he felt gratitude, because someone was giving them what he had not known how to give them: presence. When the storm calmed and the lights came back, Lucy stood up, exhausted. Richard approached and, without saying anything, offered her a towel. She accepted it with a tired smile. "Thank you for coming back," he said. "I am always going to come back," Lucy answered, looking at the children, "because they need me." And Richard knew in that moment that he was witnessing something bigger than a relationship between employee and employer. He was seeing true love, the kind of love that is not bought, that is not negotiated, the love that simply appears. Days after the storm episode, Richard could not stop thinking about Isabella's notebook. He had avoided her things for so long that he had almost forgotten how much of her was still in that house. One afternoon, after Lucy went to rest, he went up to the attic. It was a place where he had not entered in years, full of dusty boxes and furniture covered with white sheets. Among the boxes, he found a photo album. He opened it with shaking hands. Isabella pregnant, smiling in front of the mirror with her hands on her swollen belly. Isabella painting the baby's room, with blue paint stains on her cheeks. Isabella holding ultrasounds, with eyes bright with emotion. There was a photo that split him in two. Isabella writing in the notebook, sitting in the garden under the same tree where Lucy now took the children. In the photo, she was radiant, as if she knew something the rest of the world did not know. Richard closed the album and cried. He cried for all the time he had lost running away from pain. He cried for the children he had kept at a distance because they reminded him too much of what he had lost. He cried because he finally understood that Isabella was not completely gone. She was in those songs, in those words, in the love that Lucy had woken up in Martin and Alvin. When he came down from the attic, he found Lucy in the hallway. "Are you okay, Mr. Salvatierra?" He nodded, although it was obvious he was not. "Lucy, I want you to know something. For a long time I thought the best thing I could do for my children was to pay the best specialists, give them all the resources. But I was wrong. The best thing I could do was be present, and you showed me that." Lucy did not know what to say. Richard continued. "Isabella wrote in her notebook that she wanted the children to know they were loved, and thanks to you, now they know." Lucy smiled with tears in her eyes. "They always knew their mother loved them, sir. They just needed someone to remind them every day." 3 months passed since that storm, and the transformation in the Salvatierra mansion was undeniable. The hallways that before echoed only with the echo of lonely steps now had life. Martin and Alvin had expanded their vocabulary to almost 10 words. Mom, Dad, yes, no, water, light, music, more here, and a sound that tried to be Lucy, but came out like Lucy. They were not complete sentences. Their bodies were still trapped in the paralysis the doctors had diagnosed, but their minds were awake, their hearts alive. Richard had changed too. He no longer locked himself in his office until late at night. He had breakfast with the children, read them stories in the afternoons, and had started to learn the songs from Isabella's notebook. His voice was terrible, out of tune and without rhythm, but Martin and Alvin did not care about that. They laughed when he sang, a broken and beautiful laugh that filled the empty spaces of the house. One April morning, while Lucy was preparing the children's breakfast, an elegant envelope arrived. The sender was the St. Raphael Advanced Therapy Center, one of the most prestigious institutions in the state. Richard opened it in his office, read the content, and felt the floor move under his feet. It was a job offer for Lucy, a position as coordinator of pediatric palliative care, with a salary 3 times higher than what he paid her, full benefits, housing included, and the opportunity to specialize with courses paid by the institution. The letter mentioned they had heard of her exceptional methods through one of the nurses who had worked temporarily at the mansion, and they were impressed by the results achieved with children whom traditional medicine had declared closed cases. Richard reread the letter twice, feeling how panic took hold of him. It was not only losing an employee, it was losing the only person who had managed to bring light to that house. It was losing the woman his children called Mom with more conviction than they had ever said, Dad. He kept the letter in his desk drawer and spent the whole day trying to decide what to do. At night, when the children were already asleep and Lucy was about to retire to her room, Richard called her to his office. "Sit down, please," he told her, pointing to one of the leather chairs in front of his desk. Lucy obeyed, nervous. Richard had never called her at that hour. He took out the letter and placed it on the desk, sliding it toward her. "This arrived today. It is for you." Lucy took the envelope with shaking hands. While she read, her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, disbelief, joy, and finally, conflict. When she finished, she left the letter on the desk and looked at Richard without knowing what to say. "It is an incredible opportunity," he said, forcing a smile. "You could help many more children. Have a real career, a future. Mr. Salvatierra, Lucy, I am not going to lie to you. I don't want you to go. My children, they need you. I need you. But it would not be fair to ask you to reject something like this for us." Lucy looked down with her hands intertwined on her lap. For a long moment, only the tick-tock of the old clock on the wall was heard. Finally, she spoke. "When I was a girl, my mother worked in houses like this. I accompanied her when there was no school. I saw how they treated her, kind but distant, useful but replaceable. And I promised myself that if I ever had the opportunity to do something that really mattered, I would not waste it for money." Richard leaned forward, listening carefully. "Here, with Martin and Alvin, I am not just an employee," Lucy continued, her voice breaking. "I am someone who matters, someone who is expected every morning, someone whose voice calms their fears. And they gave me something I never had, a family, not of blood, but of choice." "So, are you going to stay?" Richard asked, unable to hide the hope in his voice. Lucy looked up, and there were tears in her eyes. "I am going to stay, but I need you to understand something, Mr. Salvatierra. I am not staying because you pay me more, or because it is my duty. I am staying because I love those children. And when one loves, one does not leave. It is that simple." Richard felt a knot in his throat so big he could barely speak. "Then I don't want you to stay as an employee," he said with a firm voice. "I want you to stay as family, as the official caregiver of Martin and Alvin, as someone this house needs, not by obligation, but because you belong here." Lucy took her hands to her mouth, stifling a sob. Richard stood up and went around the desk, kneeling in front of her, something he had never in his life done before anyone. "Lucy, my children are alive thanks to you, not just physically. They are really alive. And I am too. So I ask you, not as your employer, but as someone who is deeply grateful, stay." Lucy nodded, unable to speak, and Richard took her hands. It was the first time they touched like that, without the formality of social distance, and in that moment, something changed definitely between them. They stopped being boss and employee. They became allies, in family. With Lucy's decision to stay, Richard felt he could finally breathe. But there was something else he needed to do, something he had been avoiding for 2 years, to honor Isabella's memory in a way that was alive, not just a painful reminder of the past. One morning he called Lucy to the garden. She arrived with Martin and Alvin in their wheelchairs, pushing them down the stone path. The spring sun bathed everything with a golden light, and the air smelled of jasmine and wet earth. "I have an idea," Richard said, "and I want your opinion." Lucy tilted her head, curious. "This garden," he continued, pointing around, "was Isabella's favorite place. She spent hours here, writing, thinking, dreaming of the future, and since she died I haven't even been able to look at it without feeling like I'm choking." "It's beautiful," Lucy said softly. "I want to turn it into something more," Richard said. "A place where Martin and Alvin can be, not just to take the sun, but to live. I want to build wider paths for their chairs, zones with adapted shade, maybe a small fountain with sounds they can listen to, plants they can touch and smell, a sensory garden, a place that is theirs." Lucy's eyes shined. "That would be wonderful. And I want you to help me design it, because you know the children better than anyone. You know what makes them happy, what gives them peace." Lucy looked at the twins, who were watching the garden with their big, attentive eyes. Martin stretched his hand toward a butterfly passing nearby, and although he could not reach it, the gesture was enough. Alvin moved his head following the flight of the insect, a small smile on his lips. "Yes," Lucy said. "Let's do it." During the following weeks, the mansion was full of activity. Landscapers, carpenters, universal design specialists arrived. Richard and Lucy spent the afternoons drawing plans, choosing plants, discussing every detail. The children were always present, watching, listening, and although they could not participate with words, their expressions said everything. The garden began to transform. Smooth ramps were added instead of steps. Low benches were installed where wheelchairs could comfortably approach. Lavender, rosemary, mint were planted. Aromatic herbs the children could touch and smell. A small circular fountain was built where water fell with a constant and relaxing sound. And in the center, under the old oak that Isabella loved, so much a bronze plaque was placed with an inscription that Richard and Isabella had chosen together when they were expecting the twins. "Love is not measured in time, but in presence." The day the renovated garden opened, Richard organized a small ceremony. He did not invite anyone from outside, just the four of them, him, Lucy, Martin, and Alvin. They took the children to the center of the garden, under the shade of the tree, and Richard knelt in front of them. "Your mother would be proud," he said, his voice breaking. "She dreamed of this garden being your refuge, and now it is." Lucy began to sing one of Isabella's songs, and the wind seemed to carry the melody through the whole garden. The birds went silent. The world stopped. And in that sacred silence, Martin said something no one expected. Bo-tiful. It was a new word, a word he had never said before. And although it cost him all his effort to pronounce it, the meaning was clear. The garden was beautiful. Life was beautiful. Love was beautiful. Richard hugged his children and Lucy joined the hug without anyone asking her to. And there, under the old tree, they became what they always should have been, a family. The months that followed were full of small victories that for any other family would have been insignificant, but for them were daily miracles. Alvin learned to blow bubbles when Lucy brought the hoop to his lips. Martin managed to hold a spoon with help for almost 10 seconds. Both started to recognize voices and turn their heads when someone entered the room. Richard documented everything. He bought notebooks and wrote every progress, every new word, every gesture. It was his way of honoring what was happening, of making sure nothing was lost. And at night, he read to Lucy what he had written, sharing it as if they were building together the story of a life that deserved to be told. One afternoon, while Lucy was bathing the children with Richard's help, something they now did together as a team, Alvin did something that left both frozen. He reached out his small hand and touched Richard's cheek, looking him straight in the eyes. And then, with a visible effort, he said, "Da-dee." It was not the first time he said that word, but it was the first time he said it looking at him directly, with intention, with recognition. Richard felt the world stop. He took Alvin's small hand and kissed it, unable to contain the tears. "Yes, son, I am Daddy, and I am here. I am always going to be here." Lucy watched the scene with a smile, discreetly wiping her eyes with her sleeve. She knew she was witnessing something sacred, a father who finally allowed himself to love without fear. But not everything was easy. There were bad days, days when the children suffered painful spasms that no medication could completely relieve, days when the frustrations of not being able to communicate made them cry for hours, days when Richard felt the weight of guilt and helplessness again. One of those difficult nights after Martin spent hours crying from a pain they could not identify, until he finally fell asleep exhausted. Richard collapsed on the sofa in the children's room. "I don't know if I am enough," he confessed to Lucy with his head in his hands. "They deserve more than what I can give them." Lucy sat by his side, leaving a respectful space between them. "You are giving them the most important thing, your presence, your love. That is more than what many children have, with disability, or without it." "But look at them," Richard said, pointing to the sleeping twins. "They are trapped in those bodies. They will never be able to run, or play, or have a normal life." "And what is a normal life?" Lucy asked gently. "They have love. They have a father who cares. They have someone who sings for them every night. They have a garden where the sun strokes them every morning. That is not little, Mr. Salvatierra. That is everything." Richard looked at her, and in her eyes he saw a wisdom that did not come from books or academic degrees. It came from having lived without having much, from having learned that the value of things is not measured in what they cost, but in what they mean. "How do you do it to be so strong?" he asked. Lucy smiled sadly. "I am not strong. I just choose to see the light instead of the darkness. Because if I focus on everything these children cannot do, I miss out on everything they can. And they can love, they can feel, they can be happy. That is already enough." Richard nodded, feeling something inside him relax. He had spent so much time fighting against reality, against the diagnosis, against fate. But Lucy was teaching him something different. Accepting did not mean giving up. It meant loving what was, instead of crying for what would never be. 6 months after the beginning of Martin and Alvin's transformation, Richard received a call from Dr. Miller, the pediatric neurologist who had diagnosed the twins when they were newborns. The doctor had heard rumors about the children's progress through one of the former nurses and wanted to see it for himself. "With all respect, Mr. Salvatierra," the doctor said over the phone with a professional but skeptical tone, "I have seen many cases of parents who mistake involuntary reflexes for intentional communication. I would like to evaluate the children again to make sure they are receiving the adequate treatment." Richard accepted, although he felt a knot in his stomach. He was worried that the doctor would try to discredit everything they had achieved, that he would reduce the daily miracles to simple neurological coincidences. Dr. Miller arrived a week later, with his leather briefcase and his analytical gaze. He was a man of about 60 years, with grey hair perfectly combed and the posture of someone used to being the authority in the room. Lucy was present, although she stayed in the background, watching. The doctor examined the children for more than an hour. He checked their reflexes, their muscle tone, their responses to different stimuli. He took notes on a tablet, frowning occasionally. Finally, he straightened up and looked at Richard. "The physical changes are minimal, as was to be expected," he said. "Their neurological condition remains severe. However," he paused as if it cost him to admit what came next. "However, there is evidence of intentional communication. When I mentioned certain stimuli that according to your notes they like, I saw clear reactions. Pupil dilation, attempts at vocalization, directed movements. That is not typical in cases like theirs." Richard felt a wave of relief. "So you admit they are progressing?" Dr. Miller looked at him over his glasses. "I admit there is something unusual happening, but I must warn you not to get false hopes. This does not mean they are going to walk or have an independent life. Cerebral palsy is not cured, Mr. Salvatierra." "We are not looking for a cure," Lucy intervened from her place, surprising the doctor. "We are looking for them to live with dignity and love." The doctor looked at her as if he barely noticed her presence. "And you are Lucy Morales, the primary caregiver of Martin and Alvin." Dr. Miller evaluated her with his gaze, clearly underestimating her. "I see. Well, Miss Morales, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but in medicine we work with facts, not with feelings." Lucy did not flinch. "The facts are that these children have learned 10 words in 6 months. The facts are that they recognize voices, respond to their name, and look for physical contact when they are afraid. The facts are that they are alive in ways that no machine can measure. The doctor opened his mouth to answer, but in that moment, Martin did something extraordinary. He stretched his arm toward Lucy and said with all the clarity his condition allowed, "Lucy, here." The silence that followed was absolute. Dr. Miller looked at the boy, then at Lucy, then at his notes. He looked at Martin again. "Can you repeat that?" he asked with a less sure voice. Lucy approached Martin, took his hand, and the boy repeated, "Here." The doctor took off his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief, and put them back on. Then he wrote something on his tablet for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. Salvatierra, I will have to review my initial evaluation. What I just witnessed suggests a neuroplasticity I did not believe possible in this type of case. I cannot explain it scientifically yet, but I cannot deny it either." He addressed Lucy with an expression that was half apology, half admiration. "Miss Morales, whatever you are doing, continue doing it. It is clearly working in ways that traditional medicine did not achieve." Lucy nodded with grace, without arrogance, and the doctor left with more questions than he had when he arrived. When the door closed, Richard looked at Lucy and smiled. "You just left one of the most important neurologists in the country speechless." Lucy shrugged her shoulders. "It's not about being right or not. It's about seeing these children as what they are, people, not diagnoses." One autumn night, while Richard was organizing papers in his office, he found something that left him breathless. A letter. It was inside Isabella's notebook, taped on the last page with yellowed tape. The envelope had his name written with his wife's elegant handwriting. "For Richard, read only if the children are in the world." With shaking hands, he opened the envelope and began to read. "My love, if you are reading this, it means something went wrong and I could not tell you these things in person. Forgive me for leaving you alone with the biggest responsibility that exists. I know you are afraid. You have always been afraid of not being enough, although for me you have always been everything. The doctors told me the babies could be born with complications. I did not tell you because I did not want to scare you, but I need you to know that if that happens, it will not be your fault, nor mine, nor theirs. Sometimes life is simply hard, and the only thing we can do is love it despite everything. If our children need special care, please do not see them as a burden. See them as an opportunity to learn what the world almost never teaches, that the value of a person is not in what they can do, but in the simple fact of existing. Do not try to fix everything with money. I know it is your instinct, and I love you for wanting to protect them. But some problems are not solved by buying things. They are solved by being present. Look for help, not the kind that is hired, but the kind that is built with trust. Look for someone who sees our children with love, not with pity. Someone who treats them as people, not as patients. That person will be a gift from heaven. Take care of her, listen to her, and let her into our family. Lastly, forgive yourself, forgive me, and forgive the world for being imperfect, because in that imperfection there is also beauty. Our children will teach you that if you give them the chance. I love you, always, Isabella. Richard read the letter 3 times, and with each reading he felt how something inside him broke and rebuilt at the same time. Isabella knew him so well. She knew exactly what he would do. Try to solve everything with external resources, keep himself at a distance to not feel pain, hide behind his money and his pride. But she also knew he had the capacity to change. And in that letter, from beyond death, she was giving him permission to be human, to make mistakes, to learn. He went down to the children's room where Lucy was singing to them before they slept. He stayed at the door, listening. The song was one of those Isabella had written, one about the stars taking care of the children while they slept. When Lucy finished, Richard entered and handed her the letter. "I want you to read this," he said simply. Lucy read in silence, and when she finished, she had tears running down her cheeks. "She knew," she whispered. "She knew they would need someone like me." "Not like you," Richard corrected. "You specifically. It is as if the universe sent you exactly when we needed you most." Lucy looked at the sleeping children, with their peaceful faces in the gloom of the night light. She loved them before meeting them, she said, and that love is still here. I just keep it alive. Richard nodded. "And I will be eternally grateful to you for that." When Martin and Alvin were about to turn 3 years old, Richard woke up one morning with a certainty that filled his chest with something he had not felt since before Isabella's death. Pure hope, without shadows. He stayed a moment in bed, looking at the ceiling of his room, and for the first time in years he did not feel the crushing weight of guilt when opening his eyes. His children would turn 3. 3 years of life that the doctors had predicted as vegetative. 3 years that Richard had feared as a sentence. And yet, here they were. Not only alive, but present, communicating, loving, being loved. He got up and walked barefoot to the window that looked out to the garden. The sun was barely starting to peek through the hills, dyeing everything a soft gold. The old tree swayed with the morning breeze, and Richard remembered the last time Isabella had been there, with her hands on her swollen belly, singing to the babies she did not yet know. I have to do this right, he thought, for her, for them, for Lucy, for all of us. He went down to the kitchen where he found Lucy already awake, preparing the children's special breakfast. She startled when she saw him enter so early. Mr. Salvatierra, I did not expect you to be up. It's barely 6. Call me Richard, he said, and it was not the first time he had asked her, but this time he said it with a different firmness. Please, Lucy, you are no longer just an employee. You haven't been for a long time. Lucy looked down, blushing slightly, and nodded. Richard, then. I need your help with something, he continued, approaching the kitchen table. I want to organize a birthday party for the children, but not just any party. I want it to be real. Something Isabella would have wanted. Something full of life. Lucy's eyes lit up. A real party. With decorations and music. With everything, Richard said. Balloons, cake, guests who really matter to us. I want Martin and Alvin to feel that the world celebrates them. Not out of pity, but out of genuine joy that they exist. Lucy took her hands to her chest, excited. Isabella would be so happy. I know. That's why I want to make it perfect. But I don't know how. I have never organized a children's party. I don't even know what 3-year-old boys like. Lucy smiled with tenderness. Well, fortunately I do. My mother worked many years organizing events in big houses. I helped her. I learned some tricks. During the following days, the mansion transformed into a hive of activity, but this time it was different. There was no medical urgency or tension, there was excitement. Lucy and Richard spent the afternoons planning every detail. The colors of the balloons, sky blue and sun yellow, the children's favorites, the type of music, soft but happy, nothing that could scare them. The decoration of the garden, cloth banners Lucy sewed by hand at night, each with a symbol, stars, moons, birds, flowers. Richard insisted on making the guest list together, sitting in the office with an open notebook between them. Dr. Miller, Richard said, writing the name. He has been honest with us, even when he had to admit he was wrong. Adela, Lucy added. At first she was hard, but over time she learned to see the children differently. Now she makes them their favorite sweets without anyone asking her. The new therapists we hired last month, Richard continued. Those you recommended, the ones who understand that this is not just a job. And maybe, Lucy hesitated, some children from the neighborhood. I know Martin and Alvin cannot play like them, but I would like there to be children's laughter in the garden, for our little ones to know they are part of a bigger world. Richard looked at her with admiration. You are brilliant. Yes, let's invite children. The children of the vineyard employees, those of the maintenance staff. Let it be a real party. The night before the birthday, after the twins fell asleep, Richard found Lucy in the garden, putting the last touches to the decoration. She had hung small fairy lights in the branches of the tree, creating a canopy of artificial stars that shined softly in the darkness. It's beautiful, he said, approaching. Isabella wrote in her notebook that she wanted her children to always know they were her light, Lucy explained. I thought these lights could remind them of that. Richard felt a knot in his throat. Lucy had that unique capacity to honor Isabella's memory without it hurting, to keep her present without turning her into a ghost that haunted. Lucy, there is something I need to tell you, he began, looking for the right words. When you arrived at this house, I was dead inside. I functioned, yes. I breathed, I ate, I worked, but I did not live. And you not only gave life to my children, you gave it back to me too. Lucy turned to look at him with tears shining in her eyes under the light of the artificial stars. "I only did what anyone with a heart would have done." "No," Richard said firmly. "Many pass through this house. Professionals with impressive degrees and years of experience. None saw what you saw. None stayed as you stayed. That is not something anyone would do. That is a gift, and I promise you that I will never, ever take it for granted." Lucy could not contain her crying. Richard, by instinct, took a step forward and hugged her. It was the first real hug they shared, without the formality of social distance, without the barrier of roles. It was the hug of two people who had gone through the fire together and had come out transformed. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for trusting me, for letting me be part of this." "Thank you," he answered, "for teaching me what really matters." The next day, the garden of the Salvatierra mansion was transformed into something that seemed taken from a dream. The colored banners waved with the soft morning breeze. The blue and yellow balloons floated in groups, some tied to the children's wheelchairs, others decorating the low tables arranged in a semicircle under the tree. There were fresh flowers in simple vases, and the aroma of the chocolate cake Adela had baked since dawn filled the air. The guests began to arrive at noon. Dr. Miller was the first, with a carefully wrapped gift under his arm. He no longer had the professional rigidity of his first visits. He greeted Richard with a warm handshake and Lucy with a respectful nod of the head. "I have brought something special," he said, showing the package. "They are texture books for sensory stimulation. I thought the children would like them. The therapists arrived, the employees with their families, some neighbors from the area who had heard of the party and wanted to meet the famous Salvatierra twins. And the children arrived, 8 little ones between 2 and 5 years old, with their Sunday clothes and their loud laughter. When Martin and Alvin were taken to the garden in their chairs decorated with streamers, silence fell for a moment. The guests watched, some with curiosity, others with tenderness. The twins looked around with huge eyes, processing everything, the colors, the faces, the movement. And then, one of the neighborhood children, a little girl of about 4 years old named Carmen, approached without fear. She stood in front of Martin, looked him in the eyes and said, "Hi, do you want to be my friend?" The whole garden held its breath. Martin looked at the girl, then at Lucy, then back at Carmen, and with a visible effort, he raised his right hand in an awkward but unmistakable greeting. The adults broke into applause, and Carmen, without fully understanding the magnitude of what had happened, simply smiled and put a paper flower in Martin's hand. "It's for you," she said, before running to play with the other children. Lucy knelt next to Martin, wiping a tear that had escaped him, not of sadness, but of pure emotion. "You did very well, my love," she whispered to him. "You have a new friend." The party flowed with a naturalness that surprised Richard. The children played around Martin and Alvin's chairs, including them in their games in simple but significant ways. They showed them their toys, sang them songs, made them laugh with funny faces. The adults talked in small groups, sharing stories, and for the first time in years, the Salvatierra mansion sounded like what it should be, a home full of life. When the moment for the cake arrived, everyone gathered around the central table. Adela brought the creation, a work of chocolate art with 3 star-shaped candles and a decoration that represented the garden. Sugar flowers, a small tree made of fondant, and 2 tiny figures that looked like the twins. Richard and Lucy placed themselves behind the children's chairs. Dr. Miller began to sing Happy Birthday, and everyone joined. The voices filled the garden, some in tune, others not so much, but all sincere. Martin and Alvin looked at the candles with fascination, the reflection of the fire dancing in their dark pupils. When the song finished, Richard leaned in and whispered in Alvin's ear, "Make a wish, son, whatever your heart wants." Alvin closed his eyes, concentrating. Martin did the same, and together, with Lucy and Richard helping them lean forward, they blew out the candles. The effort was monumental for them, their cheeks puffed out, their bodies tensed, but they achieved it. The flames flickered and went out, and the garden exploded. In cheers. "They did it!" Carmen shouted, jumping with joy. The twins opened their eyes, surprised at themselves, and then began to laugh, that broken and precious laugh that was music to the ears of those who loved them. The cake was served, gifts were opened. Sensory toys, texture books, adapted musical instruments, and the children kept playing until the sun began its descent. One by one, the guests said goodbye, each with a kind word, a look of admiration, a thank you for inviting us to celebrate something so beautiful. When the last guest left, only the four of them remained: Richard, Lucy, Martin, and Alvin. The garden was in a happy mess, with napkins on the ground, balloons deflating, cake remains on the tables, but no one wanted to pick up yet. They wanted to stay in that moment a little longer. Richard sat on the grass next to the children's chairs, something he would never have done 3 years ago. Lucy joined him, taking off her shoes and feeling the fresh grass under her feet. The twins were exhausted but happy, with sleepy smiles on their chocolate-stained faces. "It has been the best day," Lucy said, leaning her head on Richard's shoulder in a gesture of familiarity that no longer felt strange to them. "It has been perfect," he agreed. Isabella would have cried with happiness. "She was here," Lucy said with certainty. "In every laugh, in every hug, in every moment. I know it." Alvin made a soft sound, calling their attention. Both looked at him. The boy raised his shaking hand and pointed to the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear among the last rays of the sun, and then, with a clarity that left them breathless, he said, "Mom, there." Martin nodded, also looking at the stars. "Mom, star." Richard felt his heart break and heal at the same time. His children understood. Somehow in their innocence and in their unique wisdom, they understood that their mother was with them, taking care of them from some beautiful place beyond what they could see. Lucy began to sing softly, one of Isabella's songs that talked about the guardian stars. And while she sang, Richard surrounded his children with his arms, feeling the light weight of their fragile bodies, the warmth of their precious life. In that moment, under the sky filling with stars and in the garden that smelled of flowers and love, Richard understood something fundamental. Happiness was not the absence of pain. It was the capacity to find beauty despite it. It was this imperfect and perfect moment at the same time. "Thank you," he whispered to the sky, to Isabella, to the universe, to whoever was listening. "Thank you for this family, for these children, for Lucy, for teaching me what really matters." And if the stars shined a little more in that instant, none of them were surprised. 18 months after that birthday party, the Salvatierra mansion had completed its metamorphosis. It was no longer the silent mausoleum of pain it had been. It was a living home, full of sounds that spoke of real existence, the laughter of the children, the conversations between Richard and Lucy, the music coming from the twins' room at all hours, the coming and going of therapists who were now almost like family. Martin and Alvin were 4.5 years old. Their physical condition remained the same. Cerebral palsy did not disappear with love. They remained in their adapted wheelchairs. They remained dependent on help for every basic need. They continued to have difficult days where muscle pain or spasms made them cry. But something essential had changed in them. They were present in the world. They recognized faces, responded to names, expressed preferences, asked for things with their limited but growing vocabulary of almost 40 words. One spring afternoon, Richard was in his office when the phone rang. It was the director of the same international medical magazine that had contacted him a year before. "Mr. Salvatierra, I know you. Previously declined our offer to do a report, but I would like to reconsider it from another angle," the man said. "We do not want to display your children as clinical cases. We want to tell a story about love, resilience, and the human capacity to adapt to the unforeseen. Your family could inspire thousands of people who are going through similar situations." Richard was about to say no automatically, but then he thought of something. He thought of all the families who were probably where he had been 3 years before, afraid, lost, feeling that their children's diagnosis was an emotional death sentence. He thought of how much it would have meant to him in those dark days to read about someone who had found a way. "Let me consult it," he said finally. "It is not only my decision, it belongs to the whole family." That night, after putting the children to bed, Richard spoke with Lucy in the garden. It had become their favorite place for important conversations under the tree that had witnessed so many transformations. "What do you think?" he asked after explaining the situation to her. "Do you think we should do it?" Lucy looked at the stars, thinking carefully. I think Isabella would have wanted other families to know there is hope. Not the hope that everything will magically fix itself, but the hope that one can live with love, even in the middle of the most difficult circumstances. But I don't want the children to feel exposed. I don't want this to turn into a circus. Then we set conditions, Lucy said firmly. No invasive photographs, no sensationalism, nothing that reduces Martin and Alvin to their limitations. If they are going to tell our story, let them tell it complete. The pain, yes, but also the joy. The struggle, yes, but also the small victories that are huge for us. Richard smiled, admiring once again the wisdom of this woman who had arrived in his life as an employee and had become his anchor. I will talk to them tomorrow. I will set the terms. The interview took place a month later. A journalist named Michael arrived, a man of about 50 years with a kind gaze and an old recorder. He sat with Richard and Lucy in the main living room, and from the beginning, it was clear he was not there to judge or sensationalize. Tell me what it was like at the beginning, he asked, when the children were born. Richard took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, spoke openly about those dark days, about Isabella's death, about the diagnosis he felt as a blow of fate, about how he had closed himself off, paying others to do what he did not know how to do, keeping his children at a distance because every time he looked at them, he saw all he had lost. They were the worst years of my life, he admitted with his voice breaking. Not because my children were a burden, but because I could not see them as what they were. People. I saw them as reminders of my pain, and that is something that will haunt me always. Lucy took his hand, squeezing it gently. Michael noticed the gesture. And you, Miss Morales, how did you enter this story? Lucy smiled sadly. I came looking for work, only that. But I found something bigger, a family that needed to heal. And I knew something about invisibility, about being ignored, about not mattering to anyone. So when I saw those children, so small and so in need of love, I decided I was not going to be one more who looked at them without seeing them. What did you do? Differently? I stayed, she said simply. When the therapists left after their sessions, I stayed. When the nurses did their shift and left, I stayed. I talked to them as if they understood me. I sang to them as if they listened to me. And eventually, they did. Michael took notes, clearly moved. Then he asked if he could meet the children. Richard hesitated, but Lucy nodded. Come, she said. But remember, they are not medical cases. They are Martin and Alvin. They are children. In the adapted room, the twins were in their chairs by the window, watching the garden. When the adults entered, both turned their heads. Alvin made a sound of recognition upon seeing Richard and Lucy. Martin stretched his shaking arm toward Lucy. Lucy, here, he said, with the effort that every word still cost him. Michael watched in silence while Lucy approached, took Martin's hand, and sang him softly one of Isabella's songs. He saw how the boy's eyes lit up. He saw how Alvin joined with guttural sounds that tried to follow the melody, and he saw above all the pure love that filled due space. This is extraordinary, he whispered, more to himself than to the others. No, Richard corrected, approaching his children. This is simply love, and love is not extraordinary. It is the most ordinary and necessary thing in the world. It is just that sometimes we forget how to give it without conditions. That night, after Michael left with his recorder full of stories and his heart clearly touched, Richard could not sleep. He went down to the garden past midnight and found to his surprise that Lucy was also there, sitting under the tree. You could not sleep either, he said, sitting by her side. I was thinking about everything that has changed, she responded. 2 years ago I was just another domestic worker. Now I don't even know how to describe it. You are family, Richard said firmly. You are the mother my children chose. You are the person who saved this family from drowning in its own sadness. You are... He went silent, looking for the right words. Lucy looked at him, waiting. You are essential, he finished, and I need you to know that if something happened, if one day you decide you need to follow your own path, I would understand. But you also need to know that there is a place for you here, always, not as an employee, but as the guardian of this family. Lucy felt hot tears running down her cheeks. I have nowhere to go that is more important than here, she said with honesty. My mother died 3 years ago. I have no siblings, I have no blood family, but I have this. I have Martin and Alvin, and I love them as if I had brought them into the world myself. Richard reached out his hand and dried her tears with tenderness. Then stay. Forever. Officially. What do you mean? I want to legally adopt you as the children's official guardian. I want your name to be on all the documents, for you to have decision rights over their care, for you to be recognized not only in the heart, but also on paper as what you are, their mother. Lucy covered her mouth with her hands, sobbing openly now. Are you serious? I have never been more serious in my life. Isabella wrote in her letter to look for someone who saw the children with love, not with pity, someone who treated them as people, not as patients. You are that person, Lucy, and I believe she sent you. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but I cannot explain it any other way. Lucy hugged Richard, and he held her while she cried tears of gratitude, of relief, of a love that was as pure as it was complicated to name. It was not romantic, although there was tenderness. It was not just friendship, although there was respect. It was something deeper. It was the bond of two people who had been broken by life and who had helped each other to rebuild. 3 months later, the papers were signed. Lucy Morales was officially the shared legal guardian of Martin and Alvin Salvatierra. The ceremony in the notary's office was simple but significant. Richard, Lucy, Dr. Miller as witness, and Adela, who had insisted on being present. When the notary handed the final documents, Richard passed a pen to Lucy. Sign here, and with this, officially, you are part of this family. Lucy signed with a shaking hand, and when she looked up, she saw that everyone in the room had tears in their eyes. That night, there was a small celebration in the mansion. Only them, Richard, Lucy, the children, the doctor Adela, and some of the therapists who had become close friends. They toasted with cider and juice for the children, and Richard gave a short but deep speech. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over, that everything good had died with Isabella. But I was wrong. Life did not end. It just changed. And although the path has been painful, it has also been beautiful, because it taught me something I never learned in all my years of privileged education, that true love is not bought. It is not negotiated, it is not demanded. It simply appears, and when it appears, the only thing we can do is receive it with gratitude. He looked at Lucy, who had Alvin on her lap, and held Martin's hand. Lucy, you appeared when we needed you most, and you stayed when it was difficult. You gave us something no doctor could prescribe: constant presence, unconditional love, and the certainty that we were not alone. So today we don't just give you a legal title, we give you our heart, because you already have it anyway. Lucy could not respond with words. She only nodded, crying and laughing at the same time, while Alvin stroked her face with his shaking little hand, and Martin said, Lucy. Mom, Michael's article was published 2 months later in the medical magazine, but it was also reproduced in newspapers across the country. It was titled The Family That Redefined Success, and told the Salvatierra story with honesty, without sensationalism, but without hiding the pain. It talked about cerebral palsy, yes, but also about the human capacity to adapt, to love, to find joy in unexpected places. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of letters arrived from families in similar situations, thanking them for giving voice to experiences that felt invisible. There were invitations to give talks, to participate in conferences about disability, to be spokespeople for organizations. Richard declined most, but accepted one, speaking at a conference about parenting and disability in Chicago, and he took Lucy with him. On stage, in front of an audience of more than 500 people, Richard spoke with brutal honesty about his initial mistakes, his emotional distance, his inability to see his children as whole beings, and then he gave the microphone to Lucy. She, who had never spoken in public, who had spent her whole life being invisible, stood in front of a sea of faces and spoke with a truth that resonated in every heart present. I am not a doctor. I am not a therapist. I am only a woman who decided to see 2 children as what they are, people who deserve love. And what I learned is this: disability does not make someone less human. It makes their humanity more evident, because it eliminates all masks, all pretensions. What remains is the essential, the need to be seen, to be touched, to be loved. And if we can give that, then the rest really doesn't matter. The audience stood up in an ovation that lasted several minutes. People cried. Others approached afterward to hug Lucy, to thank her for putting into words what they felt but did not know how to express. A year later, on Martin and Alvin's 5th birthday, the Salvatierra mansion was filled with celebration again. This time there were more guests. Families who had contacted Richard and Lucy after reading the article, children with different disabilities who had found in the Salvatierra twins a kind of inspiration, therapists who worked with new methods based on the constant presence approach that Lucy had modeled. The garden was a beautiful chaos of children playing, adults talking, music playing. And in the center of all, under the old tree, were Martin and Alvin, surrounded by love. When the moment for the cake arrived, this time with 5 candles, Richard and Lucy placed themselves together behind the children's chairs, no longer as boss and employee, not even as shared legal guardians, but as what they really were, a family united not by blood, but by choice. The candles were lit, and the birthday song filled the air. Martin and Alvin closed their eyes to make their wishes, and when they blew out the candles, with help as always, the whole garden exploded in joy. Later, when everyone had left and the sun was setting, dyeing the sky with impossible colors, the 4 of them stayed in the garden. The children were exhausted but happy. Lucy sang softly, and Richard, looking at his imperfect and perfect family, felt a peace he did not know was possible. "Do you know what Isabella would wish if she could see us now?" he asked in a low voice. "What?" Lucy answered, also in whispers. "That we continued exactly like this, living, loving, being happy, even when it's difficult." Lucy leaned her head on Richard's shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over time. "She is watching," she said with certainty. "She is in the stars the children point to every night. She is in the songs we sing. She is in every moment of love we share. Because love does not die, Richard. It only changes form." And in that moment, as if the universe wanted to confirm her words, a shooting star crossed the sky. Alvin saw it and shouted with excitement, "Mom! Star!" Martin nodded, also looking. "Mom! Always here." Richard surrounded his children with his arms, and Lucy did the same on the other side. And there, under the sky filling with stars, they understood the final lesson that life had wanted to teach them, that the value of an existence is not measured in what can be done, but in how much love can be given and received. That perfection does not exist, but beauty does, even in imperfection. That families are not always the ones we are born into, but the ones we build with choice and commitment. And that the light of true love, that which is not bought or negotiated, that which simply appears when you least expect it and saves you when you need it most, that light never, ever goes out.